Have you ever noticed how some people move through life almost invisible? They're not loud, they're not disruptive, they don't demand attention. Instead, they shrink themselves. They walk carefully, as if trying not to disturb the air around them. They listen more than they speak. They apologize even when they've done nothing wrong. And if you look closely enough, you'll see it. The quiet hesitation before they speak, the way their eyes scan the room before they relax, the sadness that isn't dramatic but persistent. These are often the grown-up versions of emotionally neglected children. And the truth is, their loneliness didn't start yesterday. It didn't start in adulthood. It started decades ago, in the very place that was supposed to feel safest, home. When people think of neglect, they usually imagine something obvious: a child without food, without shelter, without supervision. But emotional neglect is far more subtle, and in many ways, far more damaging. It doesn't leave bruises on the skin. It leaves them on the nervous system, on self-worth, on identity. Because emotional neglect is defined not by what happened, but by what didn't. No one noticed when the child was scared. No one asked why they were crying. No one mirrored their excitement or curiosity. No one helped them make sense of what they felt. And because nothing bad enough happened, many children grow up believing nothing was wrong. They just know something is missing. They know that while other children laughed freely, cried openly, and spoke without fear, they learned to hold it all in. They learned early that their emotions were either inconvenient or invisible. So they adapted. Developmental psychology shows that children don't need perfect parents. They don't need constant validation. What they need is to feel seen, soothed, and understood often enough. When that doesn't happen, when parents are distracted, overwhelmed, emotionally unavailable, or shut down themselves, the child begins to feel unseen. And invisibility, when carried for years, becomes a quiet kind of trauma. Unlike abuse, emotional neglect doesn't give you a clear story to tell. There's no single moment to point to and say, "That's when it broke me." Instead, it's thousands of small moments. Moments where the child reaches out and no one responds. Moments where feelings are dismissed, minimized, or ignored. Moments where the message is subtle but consistent. Your inner world doesn't matter here. Over time, the child stops reaching. They stop trusting their emotions. They stop expressing needs. They stop taking up space, and silence becomes their survival strategy. As adults, this silence doesn't disappear. It evolves. The emotionally neglected child often becomes the adult who feels lonely even in relationships, who feels disconnected even when surrounded by people, who looks capable, independent, even strong, but privately wonders, "Does anyone really see me?" Because they were never taught how to recognize their own emotions, they often struggle to know themselves. They doubt their instincts. They suppress their needs. They work endlessly to prove their worth. Yet no achievement ever fills the emptiness. Because loneliness, in this sense, isn't about being alone. It's about being unknown. Research shows that chronic loneliness impacts health as severely as heavy smoking. It increases the risk of depression, anxiety, and even heart disease. And when researchers trace the roots of this loneliness, the same pattern appears again and again. A child who learned their feelings didn't matter. It's important to say this clearly. Most parents who emotionally neglect their children are not cruel. They're not malicious. Many were emotionally neglected themselves. They may have provided food, safety, education, and structure. They may have loved their children deeply. But love without emotional attunement can still wound. A parent who says, "Stop crying, you're fine," may believe they're building strength, but the child hears, "Your pain is wrong." A parent who dismisses excitement with, "Calm down, it's not a big deal," may think they're grounding their child, but the child hears, "Your joy is too much." Over time, these messages accumulate, and the child learns not to trust their inner world. Children are remarkably adaptive. To survive, they develop masks. Some become the perfect child, high-achieving, responsible, always trying to earn love through performance. Some become invisible, quiet, withdrawn, careful not to need anything. Others act out, not because they want trouble, but because even negative attention feels better than none. Different strategies, same wound. A hunger to be seen. As adults, these masks remain. The perfectionist overworks and burns out, secretly feeling unworthy. The invisible one avoids conflict, vulnerability, and risk, believing they don't deserve more. The rebel may sabotage relationships before abandonment can happen. Different lives on the surface, the same loneliness underneath. One of the most damaging effects of emotional neglect is how it distorts self-perception. Because nothing obvious happened, children assume they are the problem. Instead of realizing my needs weren't met, they conclude I shouldn't have needs. This belief can last decades. It shows up as low self-esteem, difficulty trusting others, a persistent sense of emptiness that's hard to describe. Not sadness, not anger, more like an absence. Like living in a house with no furniture. You can walk through it, but nothing feels lived in. And yet, this is where the story changes, because healing is possible. And it begins with naming what happened. For many emotionally neglected adults, the first step is realizing they are not broken, that the emptiness they feel is not proof of defectiveness, but a natural response to what was missing. This realization alone can be liberating, because it shifts the question from what's wrong with me to what happened to me. And that shift dissolves shame. Neuroscience shows that the brain remains plastic throughout life. It can adapt, it can rewire. When you begin acknowledging your emotions, practicing self-compassion, and forming safe connections, you are literally teaching your nervous system a new language. Slowly, the empty rooms inside begin to fill. But healing isn't easy. When you've spent years suppressing emotions, feeling them again can be overwhelming. Many adults cry without knowing why, feel anger that seems disproportionate, experience joy that feels fragile. This isn't weakness, it's the nervous system thawing. One of the most important practices in healing emotional neglect is emotional literacy, learning to name and understand what you feel. Journaling can help, not as productivity, but as permission. Asking yourself, what am I feeling right now, rebuilds the bridge to your inner world. Another crucial step is safe connection. Healing rarely happens alone. Even one relationship where you feel listened to, validated, and respected can begin to repair decades of loneliness. Secure adult relationships have been shown to reshape attachment patterns and restore a sense of safety. And when those relationships feel hard to find, there is another path: reparenting yourself. Becoming the attentive presence you never had. When you feel sad, you comfort yourself instead of dismissing it. When you feel joy, you allow it instead of shrinking it. When you feel fear, you respond with gentleness instead of shame. These small acts accumulate. They teach your nervous system, my emotions matter. I am allowed to exist. Healing is not linear. Some days you feel grounded, other days you retreat. That's normal. You are undoing years of conditioning. What matters is persistence. And it's important to remember, emotional neglect doesn't just live in the mind. It lives in the body. Tension, shallow breathing, collapsed posture. Practices that reconnect you to your body, mindful movement, breath awareness, stillness, can help release what words cannot. Loneliness, when seen clearly, is not a curse. It's a signal. A message that says, I was meant to be known. And the paradox is this: the sensitivity that made you feel unseen as a child can become your greatest strength. Because you know what invisibility feels like. you notice others. Because you know dismissal, you offer compassion. Because you know loneliness, you create connection. Many deeply empathetic, intuitive, and creative people were once emotionally neglected children. Their pain became perception. And this is where the cycle can break. Not through perfection, not through erasing the past, but through the quiet, radical choice to be present, to feel, to speak, to connect. The loneliness you carry is not proof that something is wrong with you. It is proof that you are wired for connection. And even if your childhood denied you that, you can still create it now. Healing may be slow, imperfect, uncomfortable, but every time you choose to be seen, even by yourself, you step out of invisibility and into life. And when one person does that, it becomes easier for others to do the same. That is how the cycle ends. Not with noise, but with presence.